Cordelia Marston signed the chapel register before the Duke of Hartwell spoke a single vow, and the steel nib scratched so sharply across St. Aldhelm's chapel that every guest heard the bride choose silence for her future. The vicar had read Edmund Hartwell's vows in a careful, strained voice, while the Duke stood beside her in severe black, broad shoulders motionless beneath cloth cut for a soldier scholar rather than a drawing-room ornament. His right hand, heavy with the Hartwell signet, had brushed the page near hers. His fingers were warm. His mouth had not moved. Cordelia did not snatch her hand away. She finished the looping tale of Marston, added Hartwell with a steadiness that made her father's ruined creditors lean forward in their pews, and lifted her calm grey eyes to the man who had just become her husband, without giving her so much as one syllable of himself. His deep, cobalt-blue eyes met hers. A thin, pale scar at his left temple caught the chapel candlelight, silver against his brown skin. He inclined his head once, not tenderly, not coldly, but as if acknowledging the conclusion of a contract that had cost them both more than ink. "Your Grace," the vicar murmured, holding out the blotting sand. Edmund took it. The fine grains hissed over the register like spring rain on Yorkshire stone. Cordelia could not have known, while beeswax smoke curled above the altar and the lace at her wrist prickled against her skin, that before the night ended, the mute Duke would break 5 years of silence for one word. She could not have known she would wish, with a bitterness that tasted like old copper on her tongue, that she had never heard it. She only knew that her father exhaled behind her, as though the signature had lifted a millstone from his chest. Professor Marston smelled faintly of library dust, lavender soap, and the oolong tea he forgot on his desk whenever Greek verbs seized him by the collar. He had trained Cordelia to keep accounts before she learned to embroider roses. He had taught her that a column of figures could confess more than a guilty mouth. He had not taught her how to marry a man who refused to speak. "Daughter," he whispered as she turned from the register, his ink-stained hand trembling on the pew end. "You have saved me." Cordelia touched his sleeve. The wool was shiny from wear. "No, Papa. I have converted a debt into a title. I trust the ancient world has produced less alarming transactions." His watery laugh caught and broke. The sound hurt her more than his tears would have done, so she smiled until his shoulders eased. Across the chapel aisle, Lord Roland Hartwell dabbed his full lower lip with a lace-edged handkerchief. Edmund's uncle was handsome in the overripe way of fruit left too long in a warm room. Glossy fair hair brushed over a high forehead, claret-flushed cheeks, blue eyes almost as bright as Edmund's, yet without their depth. His silk waistcoat was peacock green. His coat cuffs were violet. The colors were expensive, mismatched, and just a fraction too eager. "A charming economy," Roland said, loud enough for 2 dowagers to hear. "One scholar's debts settled, one dukedom secured from inconvenient solitude. Hartwell has always kept curious accounts." Cordelia turned her head. Her dove-grey silk skirt whispered around her ankles, and the deep ivory lace at her bodice rose with one measured breath. "Then I am fortunate," she said, "that I read accounts fluently." Roland's smile spread. Edmund's did not. But Cordelia saw his signet hand close once, hard enough that the knuckles paled. The chapel door opened to early April brightness. Air smelling of rain, cut grass and wet hawthorn swept over the rushes. Outside, the estate chapel crouched in pale stone beside Hartwell House, and beyond it, the Yorkshire hills lifted green shoulders under a sky crowded with silver cloud. Cordelia stepped onto the threshold as the bride of a man whose silence had more force than most gentlemen's speeches. Ned Calloway, the young head groom, stood beside the ducal carriage with his hat clutched to his chest and his freckled face arranged into what he plainly believed was solemn grandeur. "Beg pardon, Your Grace," he blurted to Edmund, "but I've put the grey pair too, as they seemed most wedding-like, being not too cheerful and not too gloomy." Cordelia looked at the horses. both of them stamping and tossing damp silver manes. "A difficult marital balance, Mr. Calloway." Ned blinked at her. "Yes, Your Grace. Horses understand such things." For the first time since the vows had been spoken by another man's mouth, Cordelia wanted to laugh. She did not permit herself more than the smallest curve at one corner of her lips. Edmund looked at that curve as if it had made a sound. The wedding breakfast took place in Hartwell House's long dining room, where spring rain tapped lightly against diamond-paned windows and turned the terrace stones dark. Silver dishes steamed beneath high plasterwork ceilings. Orange peel, roast capon, warm bread, beeswax and hothouse roses made the air rich enough to chew. Cordelia ate. She had no patience with brides who floated through catastrophe on sugared air. Her father had sold his books, her childhood silver, and finally her hand, to keep bailiffs from his door. Therefore she accepted syllabub, cold trout, and 2 sugared almonds with the clear-eyed appetite of a woman who intended to survive. When an elderly aunt by marriage stared at her plate, Cordelia lifted her spoon. "I have discovered that grief and hunger can occupy the same body," she said. "Hunger is less polite, so I attend to it first." The aunt choked on a sip of negus. Ned Calloway, posted near the sideboard for some reason no one explained, made a sound like a cough strangled by a grin. Edmund sat at the head of the table, silent and unreadable. A small slate rested beside his plate, untouched. He had not written to her. He had not written to anyone. His black sleeve brushed the white damask whenever he reached for his glass. His hands were broad, square, and almost shockingly alive against all that polished stillness. Cordelia felt watched. Not inspected, as the county ladies inspected her gown, her copper-bronze hair braided in a simple coronet, her slender height and straight carriage. Edmund watched as if he were listening without ears. Roland sat 3 seats away and poured sauce over his capon until the plate shone. "My nephew has always had unusual notions of domestic bliss," he said. "Do not be wounded if he leaves all conversation to you, Duchess." "I have survived academic dinners," Cordelia said, cutting her trout with exact pressure. "Men have discussed Homer across me for 4 hours when I held the salt. Silence has novelty." Roland laughed first. Others followed, uncertainly. Edmund looked down. His thumb moved once over the Hartwell signet, tracing the engraved crest. A candle in a tower window. Mrs. Hayward, the housekeeper, entered with a footman at her shoulder. She was in her 60s, iron-grey hair pinned into a knot tight enough to discipline the entire room. Her black gown smelled faintly of starch and lavender. She set a covered dish before Cordelia with the respect due a duchess, and the caution due an intruder. "Your Grace," she said. "Mrs. Hayward." Cordelia lifted the cover and inhaled cinnamon, butter, and baked apple. "If this is a peace offering, it is excellently armed." The housekeeper's stern mouth twitched before she could prevent it. Edmund saw that too. By late afternoon, the guests had thinned into murmuring clusters and carriage wheels over wet gravel. Cordelia stood beneath a portrait of Edmund's father, a broad-shouldered man with cobalt eyes, one hand resting near a painted candle. A motto carved into the frame caught her attention. "Keep the candle lit." "Old Hartwell nonsense," Roland said behind her. His cologne carried too much bergamot. "My brother collected phrases the way poorer men collect unpaid bills." Cordelia did not turn at once. A household motto. A scolding, a prayer, a nuisance. Roland's glass clicked softly against a side table. "My late sister-in-law adored it. So did the younger girl when she was still with us." The younger girl. Cordelia turned. "You refer to His Grace's sister?" Roland's smile changed by less than a hair. "My dear Duchess, you have been married half a day and already catalogued the family ghosts." "Only those introduced to me at breakfast." His eyes gleamed, but before he answered, Edmund crossed the hall. He moved without haste, yet people stepped aside as if a door had opened in a war. He stopped beside Cordelia and lifted his slate. The chalk moved in short, white strokes. He turned the slate toward Roland, not her. Enough. The word was not spoken, but it altered the air. Roland's fingers tightened around his glass until the crystal rang. Naturally, Roland murmured. One must not overburden a bride with family history. Not before nightfall. Cordelia felt heat rise under her lace. Edmund's gaze shifted to her, and for one reckless second she wished he would write something meant for her alone. A command, an apology, a warning. Anything. He wiped the slate clean with the side of his thumb. That was her first lesson in Hartwell House. Silence could be used as a locked door. The Duchess's bedchamber smelled of lavender linen, beeswax, and the faint mineral chill of old stone. A fire burned too politely in the grate. Someone had placed white roses in a blue porcelain bowl and turned down the bed until the sheets gleamed like frost. Cordelia stood in the center of the room, her wedding gown unfastened at the back by a maid who had blushed and fled. The ivory lace slid loose from her shoulder. Her copper-bronze braid had begun to loosen, curls warming against the nape of her neck. In the mirror, she looked beautiful, in the severe, astonished way of a woman who has been dressed for sacrifice and arrived with a ledger in her pocket. She waited for her husband until the candle burned low enough to purl at the wick. At 11:30, she laughed once. It was not a merry sound. "Very well, Your Grace," she said to the empty room. "If you will not come to the wedding night shall come to you." She wrapped herself in a dark shawl, took one candle, and opened the door. Hartwell House at night was a geography of whispers. Rain ticking against leaded glass, boards creaking under old carpets, distant servants lowering latches, the soft brush of her own slippered feet along stone. Portraits watched from the gallery with varnished disapproval. Somewhere below, a clock struck once, then held its breath. Cordelia followed light. It showed beneath the library door, a thin gold blade across the corridor floor. She placed her palm on the brass handle. It was cold enough to bite. "I advise you to be decently occupied," she said through the door, "or indecently prepared to explain yourself." No answer. She entered. The library was vast, lined from floor to ceiling with old books that smelled of leather, dust, smoke, and the dry sweetness of paper. A fire had collapsed into red coals. One velvet curtain hung half-drawn across a tall window. Beyond it, spring rain silvered the black glass. Edmund stood before that curtain in shirt sleeves and waistcoat, black hair damp at the temples, shoulders filling the narrow strip of reflected light. He turned. Cordelia's breath caught against her will. Without the formal coat, he seemed larger, more dangerous in his restraint. The scar at his temple shone pale. His cobalt eyes moved over her loosened hair, her shawl, her bare fingertips wrapped around the candlestand. "You omitted a custom," she said. He reached for the slate on the table. "No." She stepped closer. The carpet was soft under her feet. Her pulse was not. "You may write to solicitors, servants, and uninvited uncles. You will not write your way through me. You married me this morning. You sat beside me all day like a carved saint with debts. You left me upstairs in a bedchamber staged for a ritual neither of us requested. Look at me and answer one question." His hand stopped above the slate. "Was I bought to be your duchess?" she asked, each word quiet and surgical. "Or your witness?" The fire cracked. Rain slid down the glass. Edmund's throat moved. He looked at her as if her grey eyes had dragged him to the edge of a cliff he had sworn never to approach. His hand closed around the back of the chair. The polished wood gave a soft protest under his grip. When he spoke, his voice was rough, low, and unused. a single word hauled out of some locked chamber beneath the ribs. Lenora. Cordelia went still. The candle flame trembled between them. Wax warmed her fingers. The name hung in the library with the intimacy of a hand placed on skin. Not Cordelia. Lenora. The Duke's face changed as if the sound had struck him. Pain, fierce and immediate, moved through his eyes before discipline sealed it away. He turned from her, took his coat from the chair, and crossed the room. "Who is she?" Cordelia demanded. His hand paused on the door. "Who is Lenora?" He did not answer. The door opened, admitting a ribbon of colder hall air, and Edmund Hartwell left his bride in the library with the first word he had spoken in 5 years. Morning brought the smell of bread, oolong tea, and wet wool. Cordelia entered the breakfast room in a gown of pale blue muslin, because refusing to appear would have granted the house too much satisfaction. Her hair was braided smooth again, copper bronze polished by the weak April sun. Her eyes felt gritty from sleeplessness, but they were calm. Calm, she had learned, was sometimes a blade wrapped in silk. Edmund sat at the far end of a long, polished table. The distance between them could have hosted a treaty negotiation. Silver covers glowed under the windows. Rain tapped softly against Yorkshire stone outside. Not urgent, merely persistent. He rose when she entered. "How gallant," Cordelia said. "Had I known you rose for women you abandoned, I might have come down sooner." Mrs. Hayward, pouring tea at the sideboard, froze for one precise second. Edmund's expression did not change. He pulled out the chair at the opposite end. Cordelia crossed the carpet, placed both hands on the chair back, and did not sit. "No. If conversation must travel this far, I shall require a horse." The corner of Mrs. Hayward's mouth threatened rebellion. Edmund took the slate beside his plate and wrote, "Please sit." "That is not an answer." He wiped the slate. "Please eat." That is a strategy. He looked at her plate, where a footman had set kidneys, eggs, toast, and marmalade. His gaze flicked to her face with the faintest question. Cordelia sat. "Do not look relieved. I am eating because I am angry, and anger is hungry work." Edmund's fingers stilled around his teacup. For 10 minutes, the room contained only cutlery, rain, and Mrs. Hayward's careful footsteps. Cordelia spread marmalade over toast. Orange peel and sugar brightened her tongue. She would not let humiliation sour breakfast. She had endured worse meals beside men who thought Latin quotations excused bad manners. At last, she set down her fork. "The name you spoke last night." Edmund's shoulders hardened. "Lenora." His eyes lifted. "Am I expected to share a house with a ghost, a mistress, or a memory?" The cup touched its saucer with a small porcelain click. Mrs. Hayward's face went white around the mouth. Edmund wrote one word. "No." Cordelia leaned back. The chair's carved rail pressed between her shoulders. "No to which? Ghost, mistress, memory? I admire economy in household management, Your Grace, but not in grammar." A footman dropped a spoon. It rang against the floorboards and made everyone flinch except Edmund. He wrote again, slower. "Do not ask." Cordelia felt the old familiar cold settle behind her breastbone. Not fear, calculation. "My father once told me not to ask why his wine merchant received payment before his landlord," she said. "That was the week I discovered 3 creditors and a forged promissory note." Edmund stared at her. "Do not ask is never an answer. It is the place where an answer has been buried under furniture." Mrs. Hayward made a soft sound. Edmund turned his head toward the housekeeper, and something passed between them that Cordelia could not read. That hurt more than she expected. She pushed back from the table. "I shall inspect my new prison while you compose a fuller refusal." Edmund stood. She lifted one hand. If you follow, I shall assume you have chosen conversation. He remained where he was. Therefore, Cordelia walked out with her spine straight, her toast unfinished, and the name Lenora beating in her mind like a second pulse. Hartwell House did not yield itself quickly. It was built around courtyards, corridors, and old grudges. Sunlight entered grudgingly through tall windows and lay in bright rectangles on oak floors. The air changed from room to room. Beeswax in the gallery, damp stone near the north stair, rosewater in the blue drawing room, smoke in the gun room she did not enter because the smell of oil and metal disliked her. Everywhere the household paused when she appeared. Cordelia opened doors. She found a morning room with embroidery frames abandoned under Holland covers. She found a music room where the pianoforte had been closed so long the dust softened its black lacquer. She found, on a small table near the window, a rosewood music box, inlaid with mother of pearl. When she touched the lid, Mrs. Hayward spoke from the doorway. "That does not play well, Your Grace." Cordelia withdrew her fingers. "Many things in this house seem to prefer silence." The housekeeper's face tightened. Her hands gripped the ring of keys at her waist until they chimed. "Some silences are respect. Some are cowardice." Mrs. Hayward's eyes flashed. "His Grace is no coward." There, a live nerve under iron cloth. Cordelia turned fully. "I did not say he was. I said silence can be." The housekeeper looked at the music box as if it might open by itself. "Her Grace, the late Duchess, kept that there." "Edmund's mother?" "Yes." "Did Lenora play it?" Mrs. Hayward's breath caught so softly that Cordelia almost missed it. Outside, rainwater slid from the terrace roof and struck stone in steady drops. "The East Wing is not part of the tour," the housekeeper said. Cordelia had not mentioned the East Wing. She smiled without warmth. "How helpful. I shall be certain to notice it." Mrs. Hayward stepped back, blocking the corridor with a body that had managed servants, sorrow, and ducal tempers for 40 years. "Your Grace, please." It was the please that stopped Cordelia. Not the title, not the warning. The plea. She inclined her head. "For today." Mrs. Hayward's fingers loosened on the keys. The metal gave a small, exhausted clink. Cordelia continued alone and found the East Wing door before noon. It stood at the end of a corridor where the air smelled colder, as if windows beyond had not been opened in years. A strip of spring light lay across the floorboards, but did not warm them. The door was dark oak, polished by old hands around the lock, and its brass plate had been kept clean despite disuse. She touched it. Cold. Firm. Locked. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. "You may come out, Mr. Calloway," Cordelia said. Ned emerged from behind a suit of armor, with the expression of a man caught courting a turnip. "I was not spying, Your Grace." "You were standing behind a helmet with feathers." "Yes, Your Grace, but privately." Cordelia looked from him to the door. "Does this wing house dragons?" "No, Your Grace. Leastways, not since I came." His freckled face reddened. "Mrs. Hayward says no one goes there." "And His Grace?" "His Grace goes where he likes, being His Grace." An admirably feudal analysis. Ned brightened. "Thank you, Your Grace, I think." The East Wing door remained locked between them, dark and mute. Later, in a small cabinet room near the back stair, Cordelia opened a drawer that stuck on swollen wood. It gave way with a dry scrape. Inside lay a child's ivory hairbrush, small enough for a young hand, its bristles flattened with age, a blue ribbon tied around the handle. The silver back was engraved with one initial. L. Cordelia's mouth went dry. She lifted the brush. It smelled faintly of cedar, dust, and something floral, long faded, perhaps violet water. No lover kept a child's hairbrush in a forgotten drawer. No mistress left blue ribbons tucked beside estate inventories. But the name in the library had sounded like longing. Therefore, Cordelia put the brush back exactly as she had found it, closed the drawer, and carried the question with her to the stables. The stable yard smelled of hay, leather, warm horse, and rain-soft mud. Swallows flickered beneath the eaves. A chestnut mare stamped in her stall, and Ned Calloway attempted to bow while holding a currycomb, a bridle, and half an apple in the same hand. "Your Grace," he said, dropping the apple. The mare ate it. "A generous household," Cordelia observed. "That was my luncheon." "Then I recommend bargaining before the next treaty." Ned grinned so broadly that the stable seemed warmer. "His Grace is in the tack room. Does His Grace know I am expected?" "His Grace knows most things before I say them, which is fortunate, as I say them badly." Cordelia found Edmund standing at a long bench, mending a broken stirrup leather with a concentration more suited to surgery. His coat was off. His white shirt sleeves were rolled to the forearm. The sight of his hands pulling the awl through leather made her halt on the threshold. He was not ornamental. That was the first clear, unwelcome thought. He was strength held under discipline. Broad shoulders, flat stomach, powerful wrists. Black hair falling forward as he bent over the work. A duke should have given the task to a groom. Edmund repaired the leather himself, with careful, rough competence. He looked up. "I found your locked door," Cordelia said. He set down the awl and a hairbrush. His face closed. "And a music box that frightens your housekeeper." He reached for the slate hanging from a nail beside the tack cupboard. "Do not ask." Cordelia folded her arms. The air smelled of saddle soap and damp wool. Rain ticked on the stable roof. "We have established my opinion of that phrase." He wiped the slate. "Not safe." "For whom?" He did not write. "For me? For you? For the mysterious Lenora, whose name you speak to your wife on your wedding night?" The chalk snapped in his fingers. Ned, outside the tack room, whispered to a horse, "I believe Her Grace has scored a point." Cordelia did not look away from Edmund. "Mr. Calloway, if you are wagering on this conversation, I expect half the winnings." "Yes, Your Grace." Edmund's mouth moved. Not speech, not a smile, but something dangerously close. Cordelia saw it and felt, absurdly, triumph. A small, bright spark under the ash. He took another piece of chalk. "You should not be here." "In the stables or the marriage?" His gaze sharpened. "Because in the first case, I like horses. In the second, your solicitor and my father's debts arranged it with remarkable efficiency." He wrote, "The bargain was necessary." "For my father, yes." "For you." She stared at the words. "You believe being married to a silent duke with locked corridors and another woman's name in his throat is a rescue?" Edmund's jaw tightened. Cordelia stepped closer, close enough to see a smear of saddle soap near his thumb. "Tell me what I have been rescued from, and I may thank you." He wiped the slate so hard that chalk dust misted over his black waistcoat. "No." She nodded once. "Then I shall rescue myself from ignorance." She turned, but his hand caught the doorframe beside her before she passed. He did not touch her. The restraint of it struck every nerve harder than contact. His arm formed a dark barrier, his skin warm enough that she felt it in the air. He wrote with his left hand, awkwardly, "Please." The word on the slate was crooked. Cordelia's anger faltered, not because it vanished, but because it found grief in its path. "Please what?" He lowered the slate. The cobalt of his eyes was almost painful in the dim tack room. "Do not ask." Do not look. Do not learn. She leaned nearer, and her voice softened against her will. Do not become inconvenient. He shut his eyes. Outside, the chestnut mare blew through her nose. Ned murmured, That horse agrees with something, though I cannot tell what. Cordelia stepped under Edmund's arm and left before compassion could make a fool of her. Lord Roland arrived before dinner without invitation and with 3 trunks. Cordelia watched from the upper landing as a footman staggered beneath one of them. Roland stood in the entrance hall, wearing amber silk, violet cuffs, and a smile polished to a shine. Rain glistened on his cloak. The smell of wet wool, bergamot, and road mud rose toward her. "My dear Duchess," he called, as if Hartwell House were his stage. "You see before you a devoted uncle, unable to leave newlyweds undefended from boredom." "How kind," Cordelia said, descending. "I had not known boredom required family intervention." "At Hartwell, everything requires family intervention eventually." Edmund appeared at the library door. He had changed into severe evening black. The Hartwell signet flashed under candlelight, and his shoulders filled the doorway with such quiet command that 2 footmen straightened at once. Roland's smile flicked toward him. "Nephew, you look as expressive as ever." Edmund lifted his slate. "You were not expected." "No? My memory fails. I thought all Hartwells were welcome at Hartwell." Cordelia paused on the last stair. "All Hartwells, perhaps. All luggage may be another question." Ned Calloway, carrying a hat box that seemed to contain bricks, whispered, "I hope the luggage loses." Mrs. Hayward shot him a look. He swallowed the rest of his opinion. At dinner, Roland placed himself opposite Cordelia, as though the seating had obeyed him. The dining room glowed with candlelight reflected in silver covers. Steam rose from soup scented with mace. Rain on Yorkshire stone made a soft hush beyond the windows, and the locked east wing seemed to press against the house from far away. Roland lifted his glass. "To the bride. May she find Hartwell's peculiarities less chilly than others have found them." Cordelia touched her glass, but did not drink. "Do you speak from experience, my lord?" "From family affection." "How elastic family affection must be." Edmund's eyes moved to her. She felt the attention like warmth along her neck. Roland laughed. "Your Grace has a scholar's tongue." "A daughter's. Scholars misplace money and expect daughters to locate it." "Ah, yes. The Marston debts." Roland's face arranged itself into sympathy. "Such misfortune. Your father signed the papers with admirable gratitude." Cordelia cut a piece of capon. "You were present?" "In spirit." "How efficient. Most spirits wait until after the funeral sermon." She sipped water and kept her calm grey eyes on his claret-flushed face. "I ask because you spoke as if you had seen the papers." Roland's smile thinned. "One hears things." "From whom?" "Solicitors' chatter." "Mr. Vale does not." Cordelia set down her fork. The silver gave one clear note against the plate. "Our solicitor has 3 virtues: bad handwriting, worse digestion, and the conversational warmth of a chapel ledger. If he chattered to you, he must have suffered an alarming transformation." A footman coughed. Mrs. Hayward looked down at the sideboard. Roland's fingers curled around his stemmed glass. "Perhaps I misremember." "Perhaps." Cordelia leaned back. "Only I find memory most interesting when it fails exactly where truth begins." For the first time all evening, Edmund moved. Not much. His hand rested on the table, palm down, signet turned toward her. His thumb struck once against the wood. Approval? Warning? She could not tell. Roland's eyes slid to Edmund. "Your bride has teeth." Cordelia smiled. "A useful quality at dinner." The laughter that followed was small, but real. Even Mrs. Hayward's shoulders eased. "Ned, stationed by the door again under some excuse of urgent horse-related proximity, grinned into the shadows. Roland bowed his head, but his gaze hardened. "Do enjoy your questions, Duchess. Hartwell has always punished curiosity." Edmund's chair scraped back. The sound snapped through the room. Roland lifted both hands, all silk and innocence. "Merely family history." Edmund wrote on the slate and turned it toward him. "Leave her out of it." Cordelia read the words upside down. Her pulse changed. "Not leave me alone. Not leave my wife in peace. Leave her out of it." There was an it. She went to the gardens at dusk because the house had too many doors and not enough answers. The rain had stopped. Early April lay damp and green over the estate, the air smelling of turned earth, wet boxwood, and hawthorn blossom. Gravel clicked beneath her half-boots. Her shawl caught on a rose thorn, and she freed it with one impatient tug. The gardens behind Hartwell House descended by terraces toward a small lake. Stone urns glistened. Lambs called faintly from a field beyond the wall. Somewhere in the shrubbery, a thrush rehearsed 3 notes as if uncertain of spring. Cordelia found the bench near the old yew walk. It was half hidden under ivy, its stone slick with rain. Someone had kept the path clear enough for private visits. She brushed leaves from the seat, and cold water wet her gloves. 2 sets of initials were carved into the back, LH and EH. Not a lover's hidden flourish. Not an adult hand declaring scandal. The letters were uneven, childish in their ambition, cut deep by someone determined to make permanence with inadequate tools. Under them, smaller and cramped, another line had been added. "Keep the candle lit." Cordelia stood very still, while the garden sounds drew away from her. LH, Lenora Hartwell. EH, Edmund Hartwell. A brother and sister with a stone bench, a music box, a hairbrush, a locked wing, and a household that flinched at a name. Her first feeling was shame. It struck hot under her ribs. She had heard another woman in his voice because she had expected humiliation. She had mistaken grief for betrayal because the marriage had begun as a bargain. But the name had not been romantic. It had been wounded, sacred. Therefore, she ran. Her skirts slapped wet against her ankles, gravel scattered. She crossed the terrace, entered through the garden door, and left muddy prints on polished stone. A maid gasped. Cordelia did not slow. The library door was closed. She opened it without knocking. Edmund stood at the great oak table, sorting letters into stacks beneath 3 brass lamps. The room smelled of fire, ox-blood ink, leather, and rain drying in wool. He looked up as she came in, and his eyes went at once to her wet hem, her loosened braid, the mud on her gloves. "Lenora Hartwell," Cordelia said. His hand flattened over the letters. "Your sister." The silence changed shape. She took 1 step forward. "Not your mistress. Not your memory of some woman I was expected to compete with. Your sister." Edmund's face lost color beneath its discipline. "Why did no one tell me?" He reached for the slate. Cordelia crossed the room and put her hand over it. The contact shocked them both. His skin was warm, his knuckles rough from the stable leather. Her gloved palm pressed against his bare fingers. Neither moved for 1 breath. 2. "No," she whispered. "Not this first. Look at me." He did. The fire cracked behind him. Rainwater dropped from her hem to the carpet. "Is she gone from this world?" Cordelia asked, choosing each word because forbidden words crowded near, and she would not give them power. "Or only gone from this house?" Edmund's throat worked. The scar at his temple whitened. His voice came as if dragged over stone. "She lived." The two words entered the library softly. They overturned everything. Cordelia's hand tightened on his. Edmund pulled free, not violently, but as if the touch had made speech too possible. He took the slate, but this time he did not hide behind a command. Chalk moved fast, breaking once. He wrote until the surface filled. Lenora vanished 5 years ago. She was 17, on the eve of her first season. The world was told she had been lost while traveling. I did not believe it. My mother did not survive the believing. My father faded within the year. Roland urged me to accept the papers. I swore I would not speak until I brought my sister home, or proved who had taken her. Cordelia read every word twice. Her chest hurt. You made a vow of silence. He nodded. For 5 years. Another nod. And last night you broke it because I asked whether I was bought to be your duchess or your witness. His eyes closed. She remembered his face when he had spoken. The pain, the shock, the word escaping like a bird from a shuttered room. Why marry me? His hand hovered over the slate. He wrote, Your father's debts gave Roland leverage over him. If he gained your father's papers, he gained access to older Hartwell accounts. I could settle the debts and keep those papers out of his hands. Cordelia inhaled. The air tasted of smoke and ink. So I was bought to be protected from your uncle. He wrote, and to protect what your father unknowingly kept. Which is? Edmund moved to a locked dispatch box, opened it with a key from his waistcoat, and drew out a packet tied in black ribbon. He placed it on the table between them. The ribbon was worn soft from handling. Cordelia untied it. Letters, receipts, copies of parish transfers, Bow Street replies, investigator reports written in different hands, some neat, some stained by rain, some with corners thumbed almost through. 5 years of searching lay under the lamplight. The top page carried her father's handwriting. She touched it. Papa? Edmund wrote. He translated an old estate settlement from my father 7 years ago. He did not know its importance. Roland did. Cordelia sank into the chair. The leather was cold through her gown. Edmund remained standing across from her, all contained force and exhausted vigilance. Tell me the importance. He hesitated. No more locked doors between us, Your Grace. Not if you want my help. His eyes sharpened on the word help. Yes, Cordelia said. I said help. I am furious with you. I am also good with ledgers, and your uncle contradicted himself twice before soup. Something in Edmund's face shifted. Not relief, exactly, but the first dangerous movement toward hope. He wrote, The Nora's portion cannot be controlled by Roland if she returns and claims it. If she remains absent, certain revenues fall under the trusteeship of the nearest male Hartwell until I have an heir. Cordelia looked up slowly. Your uncle? Edmund nodded. And if you have a child, his opportunity narrows. He flinched at the bluntness of it, but he did not look away. Cordelia pushed the letters into a neat stack. Her fingers were steady now. This, at least, was a language she understood. Then he wanted you isolated, silent, and heirless. Edmund wrote, Yes. And now you have a duchess who asks impertinent questions at dinner. A faint line appeared beside his mouth. Cordelia felt it like sunlight through a crack. Do not become cheerful, she warned. I am still deciding whether to forgive you. He wrote, I was not cheerful. You were approaching it. I dislike being rushed. His mouth curved. Barely. It was gone almost before she could be certain, but Cordelia saw it, and her own anger loosened by one thread. The library became their war room. By midnight, the great oak table was crowded with letters, ledgers, maps, sealing wax, old estate rolls, and 2 cups of tea gone bitter. The fire burned higher now. Shadows moved along the book spines. Rain whispered on the windows, and the half-drawn velvet curtain had been pulled wide, so the black glass reflected them side by side. Cordelia removed her wet gloves and flexed cold fingers over the accounts. Edmund noticed. Without a word, he set a warmed brick wrapped in flannel near her right hand. She looked at it. "Do you comfort all your unwilling brides with masonry?" He wrote, "Only those who drip on estate papers." Careful, that was nearly wit. He underlined nearly. Cordelia laughed. The sound startled her, rich and low in the hush. Edmund's gaze lifted to her mouth, and the laughter altered before it ended. Something warm moved beneath her skin. She bent quickly over the ledger. "Roland's expenditures," she said. "Show me the year Lenora vanished." Edmund spread 3 ledgers before her. His shoulder brushed the back of her chair as he leaned over to point. He smelled of leather, smoke, rain, and some clean, sharp soap. Cordelia felt the heat of his body at her side with absurd precision. She focused on columns, dates, sums. "Here," she murmured. "Quarterly annuity to a widow in Richmond. 2 round." He wrote on a scrap, "Already checked." "Of course you did." She turned a page. "A charitable grant to St. Bartholomew's Infirmary." Checked. "A chapel restoration in Northumberland." Checked. "I begin to see why you did not require a wife." He wrote, "I required one who would see what I missed." Cordelia's fingers stopped on the page. He seemed to realize what he had written at the same moment she did. His hand moved toward the slate, perhaps to wipe it clean. She placed her fingertips lightly on its edge. "Leave it." The fire hissed around a pocket of sap. For several minutes, neither spoke nor wrote. They worked. Cordelia followed numbers. Edmund fetched boxes and arranged letters in chronological order. Sometimes their hands met over a page. Each time, contact lasted less than a second, but her body remembered the warmth long after her eyes returned to ink. At 2 a.m, Cordelia found the parish transfer. It sat hidden under a list of repairs to tenants' cottages. A sum transferred by Roland Hartwell, privately, to a parish in the next county. The date lay 3 days after Lenora's vanished carriage was reported. The entry named no purpose, only initials. R.N.A. Cordelia tapped the page. "Who is Reverend Mother Agnes?" Edmund's hand closed on the table edge. "You know the initials." He wrote, "A small convent near Whitby. My mother sent linen there." "Did you check it?" His chalk paused. 5 years ago. They said no Hartwell had come there." "Who said?" "The portress." "Not the Reverend Mother." He looked at her. Cordelia felt her mind sharpen, every column and clue sliding into a new arrangement. "Roland paid money to a parish connected to a convent your mother knew. He may have known you would ask there first. He may have paid someone to answer the door and lie." Edmund wrote nothing. "We go there." He shook his head once. Cordelia stood so quickly the chair legs scraped. "Do not begin a new variety of no. I have just become useful, and I dislike being shelved." He wrote, "It is not safe." That phrase again. It is a poor argument wearing a cloak. His eyes flashed. "If you leave me behind," she said, "I shall follow in a hired gig with Ned Calloway as my navigator, and we will both arrive in a ditch." From the corridor, Ned's voice drifted in horror. "I object to the ditch, Your Grace." Cordelia did not turn. "Then pack oats." Edmund stared at the open door. Ned's boots retreated at speed. Something like a laugh moved through Edmund's chest, silent but visible. He set down the chalk, looked at Cordelia, and gave one sharp nod. She sat again, satisfied. "Excellent," Partnership established under threat of incompetent travel. He wrote, "At dawn." "At dawn," she agreed. "And, Your Grace?" He waited. "If you have any further truths locked in this house, bring the keys." The east wing door stood between them and dawn. Cordelia found Edmund there after 3 hours' rest, dressed for riding in black, one gloved hand resting near the brass lock. The corridor smelled of cold stone, dust, and rain-damp wood. A lamp burned low on a bracket, casting amber light over his scar. "You came here before leaving," she said. He turned. In the dimness, his cobalt eyes looked almost black. "To ask permission?" His jaw tightened. He shook his head. "To promise?" He touched the door with 2 fingers. Cordelia stepped beside him. Her dark forest green riding habit brushed his boot. She had dressed herself because waiting for a maid seemed too gentle an occupation for the morning. Her braid was pinned tightly, but small copper curls had already escaped near her ear. "Keep the candle lit," she said, looking at the locked door. Edmund's hand fell. "Your father?" He nodded. What did he mean? Edmund drew a breath. For a moment, she thought he would write. Instead, he turned his face toward the door and spoke, not smoothly, but audibly. "For the one who has not come home." Cordelia's throat tightened. Those were more than 2 words. His voice, though low and rough, filled the corridor in a way his silence never had. It seemed to unsettle the dust. She did not reach for him, not yet. She understood now that every syllable cost him. "Then we keep it lit," she said. Mrs. Hayward appeared at the far end of the corridor with a wrapped parcel in her hands. Her eyes were wet, but her back remained straight. "For the road, Your Grace." She held the parcel out to Cordelia. "Bread, cheese, ginger biscuits. His Grace forgets that people are not sustained by purpose alone." A grave oversight in a husband. The housekeeper's gaze flicked to Edmund. He learned it young. Edmund's face softened in a way that made him look, for 1 second, not younger exactly, but less carved by endurance. Mrs. Hayward looked at Cordelia. "If you find anything, send word before you return. I will have the east wing ready." Cordelia heard what was not said. Ready for whom? She took the parcel. It was warm from the kitchen, smelling of yeast and ginger. "Thank you." Mrs. Hayward caught her hand, fingers dry and strong. "Bring him back with hope, if you can." Cordelia glanced at Edmund. "I intend to bring myself back with answers. Hope may ride pillion." Ned Calloway had saddled 2 horses and packed enough oats for a military campaign. "I was uncertain of road conditions," he explained, securing a strap with fierce concentration. "Also, if Your Grace insists on ditches, oats may console the horses." Cordelia mounted the bay mare Edmund had chosen for her. The leather was cool under her gloved hands. The yard smelled of horse sweat, wet straw, and morning smoke from kitchen chimneys. "Mr. Calloway, I never insist on ditches. I merely attract them when gentlemen conceal directions." Ned looked at Edmund. "His Grace conceals directions excellently." Edmund gave the young groom a look. Ned swallowed. "In a noble manner." Cordelia laughed as the horses moved out under the arch. The road to the next county ran over green-edged hills and through villages washed clean by spring rain. Hawthorn bloomed white along the hedgerows. Lambs scattered from stone walls. Wheels from farm carts had cut the road into slick brown ruts, and the horses' hooves made wet, sucking sounds in the mud. They rode mostly in silence, but it was no longer empty. Edmund pointed out bad ground before she reached it. Cordelia shared ginger biscuits from Mrs. Hayward's parcel, and watched him refuse twice, before accepting one with the solemnity of a treaty. "You may chew," she said. "I shall not report it to the county." He swallowed, eyes amused despite himself. At midday they stopped near a stream. Water ran bright over stones. Edmund dismounted first and came to her side. He did not offer his hands until she looked down at him. "Do you intend to lift me?" she asked, "or merely supervise my descent?" One dark brow rose. "I am capable of dismounting." He stepped back. The mare shifted at the wrong instant. Cordelia's boot slipped from the stirrup, and Edmund caught her by the waist with reflexive ease. For one suspended second, her hands gripped his shoulders. Hard muscle held steady beneath wool. His fingers pressed through the fabric of her riding habit, not possessive, not lingering, but exact. Her feet touched the ground. Neither moved. The stream whispered over stones. A lark sang somewhere above the field. Cordelia could smell leather, damp earth, and the clean salt of his skin where exertion had warmed him. "That," she said, because silence had become too bright, "was not supervision." Edmund released her at once. Colour moved along his cheekbones. He took out the slate from his saddlebag. Necessary intervention. "How fortunate. I prefer my humiliations documented in formal language." He wrote, "Not humiliation." "No? Grace," he wrote. Cordelia looked at the word until it blurred. He wiped it away too quickly. They reached the convent near sunset. It stood behind a low stone wall at the edge of a village that smelled of peat smoke, wet nets, and baking rye. The sea was somewhere beyond the hills. Cordelia could taste salt under the rain-clean air. A bell rang once, thin and silver. Reverend Mother Agnes received them in a parlour with whitewashed walls, a crucifix, and a vase of early daffodils. She was small, older than Cordelia had expected, with quick, dark eyes and hands folded so tightly that the knuckles shone. A younger sister brought tea and left without sound. Edmund placed his card on the table. Cordelia watched the Reverend Mother's face. It changed. Barely, but it changed. "Your Grace," the nun said. Her voice was soft, each word weighed against an oath. "This house welcomes travellers." "We are not travellers," Cordelia said. Edmund's gloved hand rested near his slate, but he did not write. "We seek someone who may once have passed through here," Cordelia continued. "A young woman, raven hair, cobalt blue eyes, a Hartwell by birth." The Reverend Mother looked down at her folded hands. "Many souls pass through houses of mercy. This soul had a brother who has kept a candle lit for 5 years." Edmund's breath changed beside her. The nun's eyes lifted to him. Compassion moved across her face and vanished into discipline. "I am bound," she said. Cordelia leaned forward. The tea smelled of mint and china clay. "By God, or by fear?" The Reverend Mother's fingers tightened. Edmund touched Cordelia's sleeve. A warning or a plea. She did not look away from the nun. "If you cannot say where she is, say where she is not." Silence filled the parlour. Outside, spring rain began again, ticking against the window glass, darkening the Yorkshire stone sill. At last, Reverend Mother Agnes rose. She crossed to the vase, adjusted one daffodil that did not need adjusting, and spoke with her back to them. "She is not in this house any more." The words landed like a key turning. Edmund's hand closed around the edge of the table. Cordelia stood slowly. "Was she here?" The nun's shoulders trembled once. "I have said what I may." "Was she moved by a man in expensive mismatched silks?" No answer. "Was she kept dulled by laudanum?" The Reverend Mother turned then, anguish bright in her eyes. "Pray for those who are hidden from themselves." Cordelia felt cold run up her spine. Edmund stood so abruptly that the chair struck the wall. The sound cracked through the small parlour. The nun flinched, but she reached into her sleeve and withdrew a folded scrap of paper. She set it beneath the vase. Her hand remained there, one heartbeat too long. "The road to Whitby is poor after rain," she said. Travellers sometimes prefer the old coaching inn at Glaisdale. Cordelia took the scrap after the nun left. On it, in a cramped hand, were 2 words: Raven Key. The inn smelled of peat smoke, ale, damp wool, and onions frying in butter. Cordelia and Edmund took a private parlour, because the common room was crowded with farmers, sailors, and a fiddle player sawing at a tune with more enthusiasm than mercy. Rain streamed down the windows in bright threads. Their clothes steamed near the fire. Cordelia's hair had loosened again, copper-bronze curls drying around her face. Edmund stood with one hand on the mantel, staring into the flames. Raven Key, Cordelia said, unfolding the scrap again. A coastal village. He nodded. One of Roland's properties nearby. He took the slate. An old fishing warehouse, sold 3 years ago. Or supposedly sold. Supposedly is a word accountants use before finding trouble. He wrote, Tomorrow we ride there. No. Tomorrow we send word home, hire fresh horses, and ride there with a constable if one can be found. He shook his head. Cordelia crossed the rug. The wool scratched under her stockinged feet. She had removed her wet half-boots and left them near the hearth. Edmund. He stilled. It was the first time she had used his given name. Your vow was not to suffer efficiently until you collapse, was it? He looked at her, firelight catching the scar at his temple. Tell me. His jaw worked. You have spoken already, she said. Do not retreat now because truth has begun to answer. The fiddle squealed below. Someone laughed. The inn's old beams creaked as wind pressed rain against the walls. Edmund set the slate down. I was 25, he said. The words came slowly, clipped at the edges, but they came. Lenora argued with me over a curricle. Cordelia did not move. She wanted to drive to our aunt's house without a groom. I said no. She called me a tyrant. His mouth tightened, almost a smile, and not one. She threw a glove at my head. I believe I would have liked her. Everyone did. His voice roughened. He placed his palm on the mantel, as if the wood steadied him. The next day she was gone. Her carriage was found empty near the North Road. Roland arrived with papers, witnesses, explanations. Too many explanations. Cordelia stepped closer. Heat from the fire warmed her skirt. The rest of the room remained damp and cold. You suspected him? I knew him. But you could not prove it. No, he swallowed. My mother believed the papers because grief wanted a shape. My father fought it longer. When he could no longer fight, he said, Keep the candle lit. I promised him I would. I promised Lenora, though she could not hear. Cordelia's fingers curled into her palm. And the silence. Edmund looked at the fire. Words failed everyone. Roland used them. Solicitors used them. Priests used them. I used them, and heard myself become useless. His breath shook once. So I made one word matter. Her name would be the next word I spoke, and I would speak it when I found her. Cordelia understood, and understanding hurt. But you spoke it to me. His gaze came back to her. You looked at me as she did, he said. Not kindly, precisely. As if you could cut through a locked door by asking where the hinge had lied. Cordelia's throat tightened around an answer. She had wanted to be angry. Anger had clean edges. This was more dangerous, warm and sorrowful and alive. I thought she was your lover. His eyes widened. You said her name in our wedding night library, she said, heat climbing into her face. You had not spoken my vows. You had not come upstairs. You cannot be astonished that I imagined a romantic catastrophe. For 1 second, Edmund stared. Then his shoulders moved. The laugh was low, rusty, and brief, but it was real. Cordelia felt it in her bones. "Do not laugh too freely," she said. "I was dignified in my error." "You were terrifying." "That is not a denial." "No." The single syllable had warmth in it. She looked at him across the firelit parlor, this man who had made silence into a vow and accidentally placed its first broken piece in her hands. Attraction moved through her with unwelcome softness. Not the sharp spark from the stable, something steadier, more frightening. A knock struck the door. Both turned. The innkeeper entered with a folded note. "For His Grace. A lad brought it. Said it came from Hartwell House by hard riding." Edmund broke the seal. Cordelia watched his face as he read. It closed again, but not fully enough to hide alarm. He handed her the note. Mrs. Hayward's hand slanted across the page. "Lord Roland has summoned the magistrate, Doctor Fenwick from London and half the county to dinner tomorrow. He says it concerns His Grace's welfare and the Duchess's influence. I fear he means to force a public judgment. I have opened no doors. Come quickly." Cordelia folded the note with careful fingers. "He knows we found a trail." Edmund's voice was very quiet. "Yes." "Then we return." "Lenora will not be found if Roland strips you of authority before we reach her." Cordelia put on her still damp boots, wincing at the cold leather. "He wants a public test." "Good. Men who perform are easiest to audit." Edmund looked at her. "What will you do?" Cordelia stood. Firelight ran along her loosened hair and made it burn copper. "Ask him a question." Hartwell House glittered when they returned. Carriages lined the drive. Rain had washed the gravel clean, and the house windows burned gold against the wet April evening. The scent of crushed boxwood and horsesweat hung in the porte-cochere. Cordelia's body ached from the ride, but she descended before Edmund could reach up, because tonight every movement would be read. Ned Calloway appeared at her elbow, mud on his boots and alarm in his eyes. "Your Grace, there are London gentlemen in the drawing room with faces like boiled haddock." "Do they smell like boiled haddock?" "No, Your Grace." "Then we have been spared something." Ned looked relieved for half a breath. "Lord Roland asked whether His Grace spoke to you on the road." Cordelia removed her gloves finger by finger. "And what did you say?" "I said His Grace spoke to horses better than to most men." Edmund paused behind her. Cordelia turned to Ned. "Mr. Calloway, that may be the finest legal evasion in Yorkshire." Ned flushed scarlet. "I meant it plain." "That is why it worked." Mrs. Hayward met them in the hall. Her face was stern, but relief softened her eyes when she saw Edmund whole and Cordelia upright. "They are assembled," she murmured. "The magistrate, Sir Abel Tressida, Dr. Fenwick, Lord Roland, Lady Mercer, the vicar, the Ashcombe sisters, and enough county opinion to curdle cream." "Excellent," Cordelia said. "Cream is improved by decisive treatment." Edmund took her arm before they entered the drawing room. His gloved hand rested lightly, giving her every chance to withdraw. She did not. His voice came low enough that only she heard. "Do not let him wound you. He would need better instruments." "Cordelia." The sound of her name in his voice changed the hall around her. She looked up. His face held no smile now, no hidden amusement, only concern, hard-won and unhidden. "I am not fragile," she said softly. "No." His thumb pressed once against her sleeve. "That is not the same as being untouchable." For a moment she could not answer. Then the drawing-room doors opened, and the county turned to watch the silent Duke and his purchased bride walk in together. Roland had arranged the room like a tribunal disguised as hospitality. Chairs formed conversational arcs too neat to be accidental. The magistrate sat near the fire, heavy-lidded and grave. Dr. Fenwick, a thin London physician with silver spectacles, held a notebook on one knee. Lady Mercer smelled of violet powder and suspicion. The vicar twisted his hands over his stomach. Candles burned everywhere, and the air was hot with wax, perfume, damp wool, and expectation. Roland rose in crimson silk that fought his amber waistcoat and lost. "My dear nephew," he said, "we were concerned." Cordelia looked at the assembled faces, her calm grey eyes taking inventory before anyone could lower theirs. "How swiftly concern travels when invited to dinner," Lady Mercer murmured. Dr. Fenwick made a note.
Roland bowed.
"Duchess, no one questions your courage in difficult circumstances." "How disappointing. Courage enjoys exercise." The magistrate cleared his throat. "Your Grace, Lord Roland has requested an informal discussion regarding the Duke of Hartwell's capacity to manage estate affairs." Edmund's hand was still on Cordelia's arm. She felt his fingers grow motionless. Roland's expression softened for the room. "My nephew's prolonged silence, isolation, nocturnal habits, and secret correspondence have caused family distress. Now this sudden marriage to a young woman whose father's debts were, shall we say, extensive." "Shall we say precise?" Cordelia interrupted. Roland blinked. "Pardon?" "Extensive is a foggy word. My father's debts amounted to £11,432, 6 shillings and 8 pence at the time of settlement. If you mean to use them accurately." The room went quiet. Edmund's grip changed, not tightening, anchoring. Dr. Fenwick looked up from his notebook. Roland recovered. "I admire feminine command of figures, naturally, but the issue is influence. His Grace has not spoken in 5 years. He hides documents. He refuses family counsel. He marries overnight. Now he vanishes with his bride after she has been in the house less than a week." 3 days, Cordelia said. "An even shorter time in which to gain influence. Or to observe fraud." The word dropped cleanly into the room. Roland's face flushed deeper. Sir Abel straightened. "Duchess?" Cordelia walked to the small escritoire near the window and opened the leather portfolio she had carried in beneath her cloak. Paper slid beneath her fingers, smooth and dry. She selected one document and held it up. "This is a copy of a transfer made by Lord Roland Hartwell to a parish near Whitby 5 years ago." Roland laughed. "Charity is not fraud." "No, but charity usually knows its recipient." Cordelia handed the paper to the magistrate. "This transfer matches, within 2 days, the first of 6 unexplained withdrawals from the trust, connected to Miss Lenora Hartwell's portion." The vicar whispered Lenora's name, as if it had opened a window in a sealed room. Roland's gaze snapped to him. Cordelia continued. "Lord Roland told me at dinner that solicitors had chatted about my father's debts. That was untrue. He knew because he had tried to acquire my father's old Hartwell papers before my marriage. He also told this room His Grace hides documents. Yet the hidden documents are letters to Bow Street, investigator reports, and accounts tracking trust irregularities. A madman does not generally audit his own disadvantage with such tedious accuracy." "Doctor." Fenwick removed his spectacles and polished them. "A fair point." Roland's smile was gone. "You overstep, madam." "Frequently. It saves time." A ripple moved through the room. Edmund's eyes stayed on Cordelia, and she felt them like fire at her back. Roland turned to the magistrate. "You see, she has been coached. A fortune hunter's daughter, trained in ledgers, placed at my nephew's side to seize—" Edmund moved. It was only one step, but the room recoiled from it. His broad shoulders squared. His scar caught candlelight. His voice, when it came, was not loud. "Hold your tongue." 3 words. The room reeled. Lady Mercer gasped. Dr. Fenwick dropped his pencil. The vicar clutched the chair arm. Mrs. Hayward, standing near the door, pressed a hand to her mouth and looked at Edmund as if the candle in the tower had flared after years of darkness. Roland went pale beneath the claret flush. Cordelia's heart struck hard enough to hurt. Edmund did not look away from his uncle. "You will not speak of my wife that way." His voice broke slightly on wife. Cordelia heard it. So did Roland. Sir Abel stood. "Lord Roland, this discussion is concluded until these documents are properly reviewed." "You cannot be serious," Roland snapped. "I am often serious before dessert." Cordelia glanced at the magistrate, surprised into almost smiling. Roland gathered himself. Silk rustled as he bowed with theatrical stiffness. "Very well. Let the county applaud a miracle. The Duke speaks, and everyone forgets 5 years of derangement." Edmund took another step. "Leave." Roland's eyes found Cordelia. For the first time, the oily charm was gone entirely. What remained was calculation under pressure. "You should have remained grateful, Duchess." "I was never suited to it." He left in a sweep of mismatched silk. The drawing room exhaled after him, but Cordelia did not relax. She saw, through the window, one of Roland's servants running toward the stables. She turned to Edmund. "He is not retreating." Edmund followed her gaze. His face hardened. "Raven key." Mrs. Hayward crossed the room with surprising speed. "Your Grace?" Cordelia folded the documents into the portfolio. "He means to move what remains of his secret before we reach it." Sir Abel reached for his hat. "I will send for my clerk and 2 men." "No time," Edmund said. The magistrate looked startled by the second full sentence. Cordelia was already moving. "Send them after us. Ned!" Ned appeared in the doorway, as if flung there by the force of his own name. "Your Grace?" "Fresh horses." "For the Duke?" "For the Duke, the Duchess, and any constable sober enough to sit a saddle." Ned opened his mouth. Cordelia held up one finger. "Choose your next word with the care of a man who wishes to keep it." "Immediately," Ned said, and vanished. The pre-dawn ride began under a sky the color of pewter. Cordelia's midnight indigo cloak snapped behind her as the horse took the moor road. The air cut cold through her gloves, wet with spring mist and the sharp mineral smell of stone. Heather brushed the horse's legs. Far off, a curlew cried, thin and lonely over the green-black rise of land. Edmund rode beside her, silent now because speed required breath. But the silence was different. No vow lived in it, only purpose. Behind them, Ned Calloway bounced on a sturdy cob with a face of heroic misery. Beside him rode a local constable roused from bed, coat buttoned incorrectly, hat tied down with a scarf. "I have discovered," Ned called over the wind, "that adventure is colder before breakfast." "Most virtues are," Cordelia shouted back. "If courage requires porridge, I am prepared to be very brave after 8. Edmund glanced back. Even in the grey light, Cordelia saw the brief curve of his mouth. They rode harder. The moor gave way to steep lanes, stone cottages, and the first bitter taste of sea air. Gulls wheeled over the village ahead. Raven Key crouched around a small harbour where tar, salt, fish, wet rope, and coal smoke mingled into a smell so strong Cordelia tasted it on her tongue. They heard the cart before they saw it. Wooden wheels clattered over cobbles near the harbour wall. Edmund raised one hand, and the riders slowed behind a warehouse with broken shutters. Cordelia dismounted into mud that sucked at her boots. Cold went through the soles at once. Roland stood on the quay below. He wore a dark travelling coat over last night's finery, but violet silk flashed at the cuffs. 2 hired men loaded trunks into a small boat rocking against the tide. A third held the reins of a covered cart. In the boat, wrapped in a grey shawl, sat a young woman with raven hair. Cordelia gripped the wet stone wall. Lenora Hartwell's head rested against the boat's side. Her face was pale, her mouth slack with unnatural sleep, but even dulled by whatever tincture had been forced upon her, the resemblance was unmistakable. Cobalt blue eyes lay closed beneath dark lashes. One hand hung over the shawl, thin but elegant, the fingers curled as if they remembered music. Edmund made no sound. Cordelia looked at him and saw 5 years strike his body at once. His shoulders, always controlled, shook once. His hand went to the wall as if stone were the only thing between him and falling. "Edmund," she whispered. Roland turned. For a breath, all of them remained suspended. The gulls crying, the tide knocking the boat against wood, the hired men staring up, the constable fumbling behind Cordelia, Ned murmuring something desperate to his cob. Roland's face twisted. "You should be in your drawing room receiving congratulations." Edmund stepped from behind the wall. The harbour wind struck his black coat. His hair blew back from the scar at his temple. He looked not like a silent duke now, but like the candle in the tower made flesh, broad-shouldered and burning. "Lenora!" he called. The name crossed the water. Not a broken word this time, not a whisper dragged from pain. A full call, raw and commanding, carrying over rope, tide, gulls, and Roland's curse. The young woman's lashes trembled. Roland spun toward the boat. "Push off!" The hired men hesitated. Cordelia climbed down the slick stone steps before anyone could stop her. Her boot skidded. Edmund's hand caught her elbow from behind, steady and warm, but he did not pull her back. They reached the quay together. "Gentlemen," Cordelia called to the hired men, "you are currently assisting a peer in removing a woman who cannot give consent to travel. The magistrate is behind us, the constable is beside us, and Lord Roland will not pay you if his accounts are seized." One hired man dropped the trunk. Roland snarled. "She lies." "Frequently?" Cordelia asked. "No. Persuasively. When required. But not today." The constable arrived at last, breathing hard, hat askew. "In the king's name, hold there!" Ned, pale but determined, stepped in front of the cart horse. "And in the horse's name, nobody move this animal. He has honest eyes." "Get out of my way!" Roland snapped. Ned swallowed, but did not move. "No, my lord. Her Grace told me to choose words carefully, and these are the ones." Edmund reached the boat. Lenora's eyes opened. For a moment she looked through him, unfocused, as if the world were far away and muffled by cotton. Then his face reached her. Her lips moved. "Edmund?" The sound was thin. It nearly vanished under the gulls. But he heard it. He stepped into the boat, ignoring the roll of it under his weight, and knelt before her. His large hands hovered, not touching until she gave the smallest nod. Then he took her fingers between both of his, as if holding glass warmed by life. "I am here," he said. Lenora blinked at him. A spark of sharpness, faint but unmistakable, entered those cobalt eyes. "You took long enough." Cordelia made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Edmund bowed his head over his sister's hand. Roland backed away. Cordelia saw it. So did the constable. "Lord Roland Hartwell," the constable said, finding his official voice at last. "You will remain where you are." Roland looked at the hired men, at the cart, at the boat, at Edmund kneeling before the woman whose return would undo him. His charm had fallen from him entirely. Without it, he seemed smaller, silk-wrapped and furious. "You have no proof." Cordelia lifted the portfolio from beneath her cloak. Rain had dampened one corner, but the papers were safe. "We have accounts, transfers, witnesses, and a reverend mother with a conscience. Proof is sometimes slow, my lord. It is not absent." Lenora's fingers tightened weakly around Edmund's. Roland. Her uncle flinched at her voice. Not from guilt, Cordelia thought, but from the inconvenience of her being able to speak. Edmund rose from the boat, one hand still holding Lenora's. You kept her from us. Roland's mouth opened. Edmund's voice deepened, rough with 5 years of unsaid things. No more words from you. The constable took Roland by the arm. There was no dramatic struggle, only silk wrinkling under an ordinary hand, a title rendered suddenly insufficient, and the tide knocking patiently against the quay. Cordelia stood in the cold harbour wind and felt rain begin again, light and clean on her face. Edmund looked at her across the boat. He did not write. He did not gesture. Help me bring her home, he said.
Cordelia stepped forward.
Yes. The carriage home moved slowly, because Lenora could not bear speed. She lay wrapped in blankets across the forward seat, her head against a cushion, a cup of sweet tea trembling in her hands. Mrs. Hayward had sent more provisions than any 4 people could require, and Ned had added ginger biscuits for medical courage, which Lenora declared a phrase worth preserving. The carriage smelled of wool blankets, tea, rain-damp leather, and the faint medicinal bitterness of laudanum, leaving a body that had been given too much for too long. Cordelia sat beside Lenora, one hand ready whenever the cup wavered. Edmund sat opposite, watching his sister with an attention so tender that Cordelia sometimes had to look out at the wet fields to give him privacy. Lenora's eyes were open now, not fully clear, not yet strong, but conscious, sharp at the edges, and alive with irritation. You are the wife, she said to Cordelia after a long silence. So the register insists. Did he court you? Edmund made a sound. Cordelia glanced at him. He stared, wrote instructions, concealed family catastrophe, and provided a warmed brick. Lenora considered this. For Edmund, that is practically poetry. I suspected as much. Edmund leaned forward. Lenora. His sister turned her face toward him. Do not Lenora me in that voice. I have been absent, not improved. Cordelia bit her lip. Edmund saw it and almost smiled. Lenora's gaze shifted between them, slow but not dull. You spoke. The carriage wheels struck a rut. Cordelia steadied the teacup before it spilled. Edmund nodded. To her? First, he said. Lenora looked at Cordelia with new interest. What did you do? I asked whether I had been bought as a duchess or a witness. Lenora shut her eyes. Oh, excellent. I should have liked to see his face. It was educational. Did he look stricken? Like a cathedral statue accused of poor bookkeeping. Lenora laughed, but the laugh broke into a cough. Edmund reached for her, and she waved him away with feeble dignity. Do not hover. I hate hovering. You require hovering, Edmund said. I require cake, sunlight, and someone to burn Roland's waistcoats. Confiscate, Cordelia corrected gently. Burning may distress the laundry maids. Lenora opened one eye. I like you. Cordelia felt warmth move through her chest. You are drowsy and should reserve judgment. I have excellent judgment while drowsy. I once selected a mare half asleep, and she threw Roland into a hedge. Edmund looked out the carriage window, but his shoulders shook. For several miles, Lenora slept. Her head tipped toward Cordelia's shoulder, and after a moment, Cordelia let it rest there. The weight was slight, trusting. Edmund watched from across the carriage, his hands clasped so tightly that the knuckles stood out. She will need time, Cordelia said softly. Yes. So will you. His eyes lifted to hers. Do not argue. I have begun cataloguing Hartwell habits, and arguing silently is prominent among them. I was not arguing. You were preparing to. He leaned back. Rain patterned the glass behind him. You are severe. I am accurate. That is worse. Cordelia smiled despite the ache in her body, and Edmund's gaze dropped to her mouth. The carriage seemed suddenly smaller, warmer, filled with wool and tea, and the soft breathing of his rescued sister. Nothing could be done with that look. Not here. Not with Lenora sleeping between past and future. But Cordelia felt it settle under her skin, like a promise folded carefully and put away. Hartwell House received Lenora with every candle lit. Mrs. Hayward stood in the entrance hall, iron-grey hair immaculate, hands clenched at her waist. When Edmund carried his sister in, the housekeeper made one broken sound and covered it with both hands. Lenora, pale in his arms, opened her eyes. Hayward, she murmured. You look cross. Mrs. Hayward began to cry without losing posture. And you look underfed, Miss Lenora. How rude. Accurate, but rude. The servants lined the hall. Some wept, some stared. Ned Calloway removed his hat and looked at the floor as if even his freckles were trying to be respectful. Edmund carried Lenora toward the stairs, but Cordelia touched his sleeve. Not there. He looked at her. Cordelia turned toward the east corridor. Open it. Mrs. Hayward drew in a breath. Edmund understood. He shifted Lenora carefully in his arms and walked toward the east wing. The whole household followed at a distance. At the locked door, Edmund stopped. Miss Hayward took the key ring from her waist. Her fingers trembled so much that Cordelia stepped close and steadied the ring with her own hand. The key entered the lock. It turned with a deep, reluctant sound. The east wing opened. Stale air breathed out, carrying dust, cedar, old lavender, and the sorrow of rooms kept waiting too long. Cordelia lifted a lamp. Light spilled over covered furniture, shuttered windows, a faded carpet, and walls where portraits had been turned inward. Mrs. Hayward crossed to the first window and threw back the shutters. Spring evening entered in a rush of gold. Dust brightened. The room changed while they watched. Not healed, not at once, but interrupted in its long waiting. Edmund stood in the doorway with Lenora in his arms, and his face altered in a way Cordelia would remember all her life. Grief did not vanish. It made room. Lenora's room had been preserved at the end of the corridor. The rosewood music box sat on the mantel. Edmund carried his sister to the bed, and Mrs. Hayward moved around them with brisk tenderness, ordering warm water, broth, clean linens, open windows, not too wide, mind the draught. Where were the lavender sheets? Who had polished this table badly, honestly? Did servants lose their senses when miracles inconvenienced them? Lenora watched her with sleepy pleasure. Hayward, she whispered. Still terrifying. You will be terrified into health, Miss Lenora. Cordelia placed the blue-ribboned hairbrush on the bedside table. Lenora saw it. Her fingers moved toward it and stopped. I thought that lost. It was waiting in a drawer. Everything here waits. Lenora looked at Cordelia. Will you open the music box? Edmund went still. Cordelia glanced at him. He nodded once. She crossed to the mantel. The rosewood was smooth and cool under her fingertips. When she lifted the lid, the mechanism hesitated, clicked, and released a thin, wavering tune. The melody was simple, high, and a little uneven, like a child practicing courage. Mrs. Hayward turned away. Edmund sat beside Lenora and took her hand. Father said, Lenora murmured, eyes half closed. Keep the candle lit. Edmund's voice answered, low and steady. We did. Cordelia stood by the mantel while the music trembled through the room, and she understood that a house could exhale. 3 evenings later, the library no longer felt like the place where Cordelia had been wounded by a name. The velvet curtain was open. April twilight lay blue against the glass. A fire burned with practical warmth rather than vigil. The great oak table still held papers, but now they were sorted. Roland's accounts for Sir Abel, letters to solicitors, instructions for Lenora's physician, household orders in Cordelia's neat hand. Oxblood ink shone wet beside a sand shaker. The air smelled of wood smoke, beeswax, tea, and rain on stone. Cordelia wore midnight indigo silk because Mrs. Hayward had insisted a duchess ought occasionally to look like one before the servants forgot. The gown's dark sheen made her copper hair burn brighter, and her grey eyes look almost silver in the firelight. She stood by the shelves, trying to return a volume of Plutarch to a space too narrow for it. "The Greeks are resisting domestic order," she said, without turning. "Papa would call it historically consistent." Edmund entered quietly, but not silently. His boots sounded on the carpet. He had learned, or chosen, to let her hear him come. "Plutarch belongs 2 shelves higher." Cordelia looked over her shoulder. "You speak now merely to correct my shelving?" It seemed urgent. "The Duke's voice restored to the world, and he spends it on librarianship." He came closer. The fire caught the blue in his eyes and the pale scar at his temple. He looked tired, still, but alive in a way he had not been on their wedding morning. His black coat fit across his broad shoulders with severe elegance. The signet on his right hand flashed as he reached above her and slid the book into place. His arm passed near her cheek. He smelled of soap, paper, and smoke. Cordelia did not step away. "Lenora is asleep," he said, after accusing Mrs. Hayward of tyranny over broth. Hayward won. Hayward was always going to win. They stood close enough that Cordelia could see the small pulse at the base of his throat. She remembered the library on their wedding night, the half-drawn curtain, the rough, single word, the door closing behind him. She remembered shame, anger, the candle burning her fingers. That room had demanded witness. This one offered choice. Edmund looked at the table, at the letters, at the place where his slate still lay, though he had barely touched it all day. "I owe you more than gratitude." "Yes." His mouth curved faintly. "You might pretend to demur. I might, but it would encourage bad habits." He looked back at her, and the humor faded into something more unguarded. "I chose silence because words had been made useless around me. That was true at first. Later it became easier to keep the vow than to learn how to live after it." Cordelia's fingers brushed the shelf edge. The polished wood felt cool and smooth. "You were trying to remain faithful." "I was also hiding." The honesty was quiet. It struck harder for that. She turned fully toward him. "Yes." He accepted the word without flinching. "Can you love a man who chose silence?" Cordelia's breath caught. Outside, spring rain began again, light as fingertips on Yorkshire stone. She did not answer quickly. He deserved the respect of her precision, not the mercy of haste. "I can love a man who kept a candle lit," she said. "I can love a brother who searched every cold trail. I can love a duke who mends his own stirrup leather and writes insufferably brief instructions. I can even love a husband who provided masonry as courtship." His eyes warmed. "But I cannot love a locked door," she said. "Not in you. Not between us." He looked at her steadily. "Your terms?" "Never lie to me. Not by speech, not by silence, not by deciding alone what I may bear." "Agreed." "Do not agree as if signing for a delivery of coal. Think." "I have thought." He lifted his hand, stopped just short of touching her face, and waited. "For 5 years I thought purpose was enough to make a life. In 3 days, you made me want conversation, breakfast, arguments, warm bricks, and a future in which my wife audits my soul with unreasonable accuracy." Her throat tightened. That was nearly a speech. I am new at this. You are improving. His thumb brushed her cheek then, with such care that the touch felt like a question. Cordelia leaned into it before pride could interfere. His palm was warm, rough at the base of the fingers. Her skin remembered the library, the stable, the carriage, every almost touch that had built this one. Cordelia, he said. Yes. I love you. The words were measured, not fluent. They did not pour from him. They arrived one by one, chosen and carried. That made them more devastating. Cordelia reached for his waistcoat and gripped the black cloth in both hands. Good, she whispered. His brows lifted. I mean, I love you too, but I wished to begin with firmness. He laughed, and the sound filled the library, low and astonished and free. She rose on her toes as he bent his head. Their first kiss was not witnessed by portraits, servants, or ghosts. It belonged to the room that had heard the first broken word, and now heard no words at all. His mouth was warm, careful, and trembling only once. Cordelia tasted tea, smoke, and the salt of unshed tears. His hands remained at her waist, steady and respectful, but she felt the restraint in them, and loved him more for it. When they parted, the rain was still whispering on the stone. Edmund rested his forehead lightly against hers. No locked doors. No locked doors, she agreed. From the corridor, Lenora's voice floated faintly. If you are reconciling in the library, do try not to disturb the Greeks. Cordelia closed her eyes. Edmund's shoulders shook. Your sister, Cordelia said, has appalling timing. She always did. I heard that, Lenora called. Cordelia laughed into Edmund's coat, and Hartwell House, which had spent 5 years listening for one lost voice, gathered the sound and kept it. In late autumn, 6 months after Cordelia signed the chapel register, frost feathered the inside edges of the library windows. The season had turned the Yorkshire hills bronze and iron green. Apples slept in the cellars. Wood smoke lay in the chimneys. Candles were lit earlier each evening, not for vigil now, but for comfort. The east wing windows opened every morning unless rain struck too hard, and even then Mrs. Hayward complained loudly enough to keep the air moving. Cordelia sat at the great oak table with a fresh estate book open before her. Her copper-bronze hair was pinned in its familiar coronet, though Edmund had loosened one curl while passing, and denied it with such poor innocence that Lenora had applauded from the sofa. Outside, Lenora's laughter rang through the garden. She was walking with Mr. Alistair Vane, a young tutor engaged to help her recover Latin, French, and whatever patience Roland had not managed to extinguish. Lenora had declared him tolerable because he blushed when contradicted, but did not surrender. Cordelia suspected the tutor's future was doomed in the most pleasant way. Near the stables, Ned Calloway attempted to train a spirited foal Edmund had allowed Cordelia to name Thistle. The animal objected to education with all 4 legs. "Your Grace!" Ned shouted through the open lower window. "Thistle has expressed a political opinion!" Cordelia dipped her pen. "Does it favor reform?" "It favors my removal from the yard." Edmund, standing near the mantel, looked toward the window. "Offer oats." "I did, Your Grace." He accepted the oats and kept the opinion. Lenora's laughter brightened the cold air. Edmund crossed to the rosewood music box, now kept in the library because Lenora said rooms should share their relics instead of hoarding them. He lifted the lid. The small mechanism clicked, hesitated, and began its simple silver tune. "Lenora's tune," he said. Cordelia looked up from the page. He came to her side and reached for her hand. The Hartwell signet brushed her ink-stained fingers. On the open estate book, beneath the date, she had written the first line of a new household account. East wing repairs completed. Music room reopened. Chapel register copied for family archive. She thought of the wedding morning, the scratch of the nib, the hush in the chapel, the bride signing herself into silence without knowing what word waited in the dark. She thought of rain on stone, a locked door, a child's hairbrush, a bench carved L, H, and EH, and a candle kept lit until it was no longer alone. Edmund's thumb warmed the back of her hand. Cordelia signed the page, not as payment, but as promise. Her hand warmed the page, and Hartwell breathed beside the new ink. If you've ever spoken a name into a silence and found someone hearing you for the first time, tell me about that moment in the comments. Subscribe for more Regency romance stories by the fire.